Good morning, Greater Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, the United States, and the world. My name is Eric Ellis. I'm the president and CEO of Integrity Development, and I'm joined today by my co-host and friend,
Tommy Lewis, President and CEO of Make It Plain Consulting. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Tommy. We want to welcome you to Diversity Conversations. We got a special guest with us today, and that's Dr. Stacey Burks Holloway. Dr. Stacey, how are you this morning?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Tommy, talk to me, man. How was your week? I think you had a birthday last week. You went on vacation. I know everybody missed you, man. They were dogging me, like, "Where's Tommy? Where's Tommy?"
Yeah, I was able to celebrate a birthday and take a little bit of R&R. My wife and I, Eric, had a lot of unexpected well wishers. I celebrate my birthday, but it's private. But I don't mind when folks kind of give me roses while I'm still here, as I do with others. So I enjoyed that. Went away for a moment, as I mentioned, with the R&R, got a little rest and relaxation, and then on the business front, still plugging away, right? Still working with our clients, still looking at strategy, systemic inequality, really chipping away at this very long-lasting phenomenon. And we have some new clients that came in. We teed up a few guest speaking agreements.
Excellent.
And then also just always working with our young people,
Right.
Kindergartners up to our 12th graders, graduate school, undergraduate school, and the like. And so, as you know, Eric, we have the puppet kind of puppeteering diversity.
I'm still excited about that.
So we were able to roll it out to our second and third graders, and they loved it. They loved it. So we were teaching those big words like diversity, equity, and inclusion from a puppet perspective, and it was well received. So we had a lot of fun.
Tommy, did you videotape that? Are you videotaping that?
Yeah. So we plan to videotape it, Eric. Right now, the school system was uncertain, right, of how it would land and all that good stuff. And I get it. Now that they saw it, they were like, yeah, we need to share it with others who weren't able to be there. I said, we need to videotape it.
Excellent.
So we'll get those permissions and be able to videotape it.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Dr. Stacey, how was your week?
My week was fantastic. We are heading toward the last part of the semester at the University of Cincinnati. So the light is at the end of the tunnel. Students are starting to get a little bit stressed, but they're also starting to realize we're about 4 weeks away from a little more sleep and relaxation and winter break. So I think we've gotten over the hump of the semester and things are starting to feel hopeful again.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Well, I had certainly an exciting week this week. I think as the whole nation has around this presidential thing that we're in. We're going to talk a little bit about that today around stress that people are dealing with and some real positive ways of trying to navigate this. But this last week certainly had some client work this last week. It was interesting, Tommy and Dr. Stacey, that a lot of times when we do this work, people will say, "Hey, can you come in and do train the trainer?" And so I don't know if it was because of the stress of the week, but I had a webinar where people were just piping in with some pushbacks. And it was interesting because they were hearing things that weren't being said.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were just sort of looking at my face and thinking, "I know what you're saying. Liberalism. And I said, "Whoa, I don't know what you think you're hearing, but I'm not saying that, But what happens is when you've been doing this for a while, you just sort of dispatch that, fairly. It's not just that, it's not hard, I asked one person, I said, "Let me ask you this." I said, do you perceive that universities in many ways have biases against conservatives? "Oh, yeah, absolutely." I said, "Well, okay." And I think I would agree with that. I said, "But you can't see it over here and then dismiss it over here."
Right.
I said, and that's what people tend to do. We recognize the junkyard dog that has us by the ankle, but we don't recognize other issues. And one of the techniques that I'll use is I'll go somewhere else to make a point. And so I talked to them about mergers and acquisitions. I mean, they were looking at me like, mergers, what's that got to do with this? I said, let me ask you this. I said, oftentimes when a merger happens, let's say I am the company that bought another company. I said that in our first conversation, I'll say things like, hey, we really want to welcome you to the team. We don't see ourselves as we're not going to change a lot about you. We really respect what you all stand for. And we're just going to kind of get out of your way and let you do your thing. I said, that's conversation number one. I said, conversation 3, we won, you lost. This is how we do it. And I'm seeing all these heads go like this. And before they know it, they're being drawn into an understanding of dominant culture versus non-dominant culture and how systemic bias can happen. And so I'm saying, basically, we're trying to remove all of those things so that, number one, people can rise to the level of their talent, skill, and ability, but that we can make the best decisions as we're interacting with others. And it sort of disarmed them. But the point is that the client was able to say, oh my goodness, this is not just a matter of you giving us a few slides and us putting somebody out there. When people are coming back to you and you have a short amount of time, number one, you got a short amount of time. We got 90 minutes, so you got to dispatch quickly. It's like when you see some of these spy movies where you have to dispatch the enemy quick because more people are coming, And so, but it's just interesting. And I think that what we try to say to people is that you've got to play the long game, that at the end of the day, this is something that you're going to be working on over time. The other thing that happened this week that is so memorable for me is that my daughter Jillian invited me to be a guest speaker for her graduate class on global diversity.
Oh, yeah.
So here I am talking to her classmates of 31 people, and they didn't know that, her father was a speaker until I mentioned her. And they were like, what? So they're in the chat room like, Billy, you're leading all the projects. We did. What you're trying to do, Tommy, I know you can relate with this. What you're trying to do is trying not to embarrass your child. I mean, that's the first order of business. Do not embarrass your child, But it really, really went well. And I was so pleased because as our children are growing up, I don't think they really know what you do at all. And now when they finally get old enough that they actually are forced to hear you because you're in their class, so that was a neat thing. And she was proud and I was very pleased. So great week.
I'm sure, if I can interject a story, I'm sure she was very proud to have you there. I had the same experience from her perspective. My first year at the University of Cincinnati, I was teaching a lessons in leadership course, and I invited my father to be on the panel.
Right.
And in the course of that class, my mother was there. I was sitting next to my mother, and my father was sharing some stories. Some I knew, some things I didn't know. And I learned, and at this point, I was probably 38 years old. I discovered that my father, when he was in the Air Force, was a drill sergeant. I never knew that.
Right.
And I looked at my mother, I'm like, well, that explains so much.
Right. Breaking news. I'm getting here right in my class.
That's right. But it was such an interesting space for me to see my father in a different light and to learn some things that I hadn't learned. So it was actually quite fun.
Right. That is awesome. Well, Stacey, let's start by just having you introduce yourself to people. I certainly want to thank you for saying yes to be on our broadcast today. We've known each other for a number of years. We're working together. You're doing some work with our consulting business, but you're also a wonderful professor and leader there at the University of Cincinnati. So why don't you just sort of talk about who you are, what you do, where you're from, kind of thing, and maybe even why diversity, equity, and inclusion are important to you.
Sure. So thank you again for having me. And it's such a pleasure to meet Tommy today. I've seen his name and know of his reputation around UC really well. So it's great to finally get an opportunity to meet you somewhat face to face. So I am, as Eric mentioned, I'm an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at UC. My training is actually in HR and management, and I practice organizational psychology. My research really focuses on what are the factors that help us create healthy work environments. So places of work where employees feel engaged in their work, that they feel that they're able to maintain appropriate levels of stress and well-being, that they're productive, they feel that they're doing important work, and they're in places of work where they want to stay. We've shared, Eric and I have shared some information about, while that's a goal and it sounds reasonable to expect people to enjoy their work and to feel like their places of work are healthy, we know from both research and practical evidence that a lot of people just don't feel that way. So for the past 25 years, I've been trying to kind of research, to teach future leaders and ways that we can create those types of environments. My background, I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, and then Lexington, Kentucky, and I've lived here, there, and everywhere in between. I've been at UC since 2006, which is by far the longest I've ever been anywhere. But I started a family here, and it's close to where I grew up in Lexington. So Cincinnati has been home for the last 14 years. I have a 12-year-old daughter. She's a 7th grader, and doing really well. She's off playing soccer this morning up in Fairfield, and just really enjoy this community, and have been grateful to be taken care of so well at the university. My interest in diversity, equity, inclusion, I've been, when you broached that question a while ago, I'm like, I don't know when, there was no specific moment where sort of a light bulb went off, but I can tell you that even my choice to study management and to do work in organizational psychology started back when I was in getting an MBA at Villanova. And very short story, I was part of the team at Villanova that was implementing the first total quality management program. And through that experience, I had the opportunity to listen to and help people who worked at that university who'd never been given a voice in their work, who saw opportunities to make the university, to make their department, to make interactions with students better, and had these great ideas, but no one had ever asked them because they weren't in formal positions of leadership or authority, and really had no decision authority when it came to that stuff. And as a young, I think I was 22, 23 years old, I noticed what that did to people. And that was one moment in my life where I realized that we all have value, but sometimes some of us get a chance for our value to be shown and others don't. So I had a couple of those experiences over the years, and I think it just cemented a belief and a passion for just recognizing that everybody has a story, that we can't judge people by what we think, what they look like, what our pre-assumptions are about those. Everybody has a story, everyone has value, everybody wants to be seen, and everyone wants to be valued. And I did not put a DE&I lens on that. It was just, I'm interested in people, and I want, and I recognize that we all have that innate desire. But the DE&I piece sort of has come, and admittedly, as a privileged white woman, later in life than it should have. But just a recognition that while we all have that desire, we have these structures that prevent us from being valued and seen and recognized and respected as much as we should. So within the university system, within the work that I do with organizations, so my attention is now shifted to sort of recognizing that we have these values, but how can we change practices, policies, procedures, so that we all are seen and valued, and we can bring our whole selves to our work and to our lives, because that's really where our sense of well-being and health comes from, like recognizing and being seen as truly who we are, and being able to achieve what it is we want to achieve without barriers in our way that come from all of these systems that create those inequities. So that's sort of where the DE&I lens, but it all just stems from this earnest belief that we all are valuable, and we all have talents and skills and deserve the same opportunities to shine.
That is excellent and powerful. I appreciate that. Stacey, you'll see over here in the chat section that we've got some friends and some troublemakers that really are. Right while you were saying all that deep stuff, Ken Wilson showed up, talking about damn time Tommy came in. Now we can have a real show. See, that's what we up against. That's what we up against right there. You were saying he should have been totally focused in on. And, I wanna thank you for that that powerful set of insights. How is it that you can allow sort of privileged white female to roll off your tongue so easily? What work have you done that has brought you to the place where you are kind of recognizing and to some extent willing to own that?
Well, it's going to sound very counterintuitive, but humility. I've learned from my own mistakes, and I have been fortunate enough to be surrounded by students, by friends, by my colleagues who aren't afraid to call me out or others out when we're acting in ways or are sharing things or doing things that sort of undermine that goal of creating an inclusive place. So learning from my mistakes, I am a lifelong learner. And I believe I always want to be getting better and will never be where I want to be. So I think it's just, there's humility, a huge dose of humility, but just a desire to be the best that I guess that, I don't know, it sounds too cliche, just to be a better version of myself every day. And I can't do that if I'm not being open to learning those things.
Right. Right. And Steve said it's about it's really called being in touch with reality. And there's so many people that aren't, it's kind of rare. It kind of takes us when we see it. Tommy, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would say, again, kudos to your own acknowledgement and recognition of your past experiences, the current state or the new reality. And I said it because a couple of things. From a cultural humility perspective, means that we have to look into ourselves and see a reality that is different than what we're actually living. So see that feedback from someone, that's one thing to receive it. The other thing is to accept it. And that's why I'm excited to hear more about, our topic for the day from a psychological perspective. This is in our minds. And sometimes I believe our minds can create something that's not really there. And then events may create these narratives, these stories, these schemas that really drive the way we view and experience the world. And so as you're sharing that, looking at potential privilege, your privilege, it is how you're seeing the world now, right? And not just you, it's all of us. It's all of us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Right. And so Stacey, I want to kind of show you again, I kind of keep pointing to our community to show you how they interact with us, but also to show you how neat this community is. So Steve comes back and says, I hope that didn't sound politically incorrect. In other words, my view is that he's saying that I don't want to come off as harsh. And I think that that's beautiful. That's the kind of thing that we get on a regular basis, is this level of sensitivity, but also directness. But I think that people are really, part of the reason why they keep coming here is because, something down in them has a kind of character that says we got to be able to talk straight, but we also have to be able to respect each other. So Steve, thank you for coming back with that. I think you're good. Stacey said you're good. I did think about it when I first saw it. It didn't hit me real negative, but I thought about it a minute. I think that was great. He is an alum of UC as well. Played sports there. I think he played football at the University of Cincinnati. So
nice.
Let me identify sort of our topic, and then I'll start with our first question. And that is, as I think about where we are right now, just to be real honest with you, I didn't sleep real well on Tuesday night. I was like tossing and turning. And for those of you in our audience who are big supporters of the president, hey, I'll fight for your freedom to support and love the president. I think that's fine. But for me, it's been a very difficult 4 years because of so much of the division. And so Tuesday night, it looked like we might have to do 4 more years. And I'll tell you, that just felt like a cloud. And for some people, it may have been exciting enthusiasm. Certainly, it looks like, half the electorate. But for others, the thought of trying to drag themselves through 4 more years of name calling and division and pointing out and conspiracies was really going to be a heavy lift. So the question that we have, because I think that this question has to be answered no matter what side of this political equation that people sit on. The question is, what's the psychological impact of political stress on us personally, within our families, and society? I just want you to sort of weigh in terms of your overall thought about this, and then from your professional perspective, what's your sense?
Well, I did a little bit of preparation for today, and I found a study from the American Psychological Association from 2017 that showed that about 60% of Americans were reported being stressed just because of the political environment. So that was 3 years ago. My guess would be, if they were to re-ask that question right now, that not only would that percentage be up, but the level of stress would probably be up as well. So what you're witnessing is a real sort of empirically validated thing. We're all stressed out, and on all sides of the political spectrum. That stress doesn't manifest really any differently because of political issues, or whether it's COVID or anything else. But I think right now what's making it, I think, especially difficult for so many of us, and in particular those from marginalized communities who are being especially impacted by a lot of the policies that are on the table, as well as COVID, is we've got the political crisis on top of a pandemic, right? On top of the economic challenges that are being created by the pandemic. I mean, it's everything on top of each other that's creating, I think, just epic levels of chronic stress in so much of our population. And the impact of that is it's physiological in terms of what it does to every system of our body can react to that. Whether it's through increased levels of heart disease, autoimmune responses to what happens. Mental health issues. We're seeing much higher levels of depression and anxiety across our communities as a result of what's happening. And just psychologically, relationships that sometimes have been fractured because of the political divisions that exist, that also exacerbates levels of stress. So all of that is very real and is well documented. And where in many ways, we're at a real crisis in our community because of all of the things that this political upheaval is creating. So it's not just a matter of who wins the election, who doesn't. That's not going. The stress is not going to go away after a winner is declared. And I think we really have to pay attention to healing ourselves individually and healing our communities, so that we can get back to a place of health, because we're not going to be able to navigate these changes and move forward as a community if we ourselves aren't healthy mentally and physically. And so I think we really do have to pay attention to those things as much as we're paying attention to what's happening in the news.
Right. And I saw some updated research from the Psychological Association Stress in America survey for July. 77% of Democrats are increased stress because of the political division, and 62% of Republicans. I found that interesting that there was a breakdown. 20% of people are losing sleep, being fatigued, or suffering depression. 11% the politics are hurting their health. I mean, this is just millions of people. I saw this other piece of data that said that 86% of young people ages 14 to 24 feel, after the 2016 election, just felt as though things were just out of control. Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's just shocking. Tom, I certainly asked you to weigh in on this. It feels as though, like the cat that can't avoid the ball. You roll the ball out there, they're just going to go get it. They're just going to run after it and they're going to go get it. It just feels like we know that we're being taken advantage of. We know that people are utilizing our fear, fight savior sort of thing that sort of get us up in an uproar. And yet we don't seem to be able to avoid that. We just sort of get caught up in this. And I think that if you find yourself staying in the arena and fighting either in your own mind, which is stressing you out, or with a physical person, at some point, man, how do we get to a place where we recognize that that's not a healthy process? Tommy, what are your thoughts? And you look great right now, too.
Yeah, came back. Sorry about that. Came back. I think that's an interesting take. Again, love to hear more from Dr. Holloway. But I would equate it to individuals who are compelled to watch horror films, for example, the gore and the violence, and then maybe even becoming desensitized to that, if not attracted to the projected outcome of that story. I would equate it to individuals who are inspired and motivated toward some sort of either mental or emotional or even physical pain, right? And what is it about our psychology or even sociology that drives us to that stimuli? And then I will also equate it to the world of work, or the proverbial hamster wheel, that we as people, we're on this wheel, this societal hamster wheel. We are still trying to move forward, but also knowing that we're not going anywhere. So psychologically, the more we're working, we're at a place of lack of control. We really don't have control of anything, right? And that creates that psychological trauma that is indeed re-traumatized and invites us to watch the news to see the outcome that we've already projected, and then it happens and there it is, and I will stay awake psychologically to watch it, right? I know I'm physically tired, but my psychology says you're going to miss the train. So those are my thoughts. Would love to hear Dr. Holloway.
Having slept about 2 hours on Tuesday night and having gotten a slap from my husband who said, "Stop checking your phone" at about 2:30 in the morning.
Right.
I am that person. Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. I think there's, and I would add, I think that the control element is we're looking for some sort of validation of our own, of ourselves, of our view, and some validation that those who share my view are going to, for lack of a better word, win out, right? So, the divisions that are here now were here before 2016, right? And we know that the current president, that those divisions have deepened just in terms of some of the rhetoric. And in all fairness, the rhetoric on the other side has been equally as polarizing, maybe dressed up in a prettier dress, but the language has been equally as polarizing. And I think, unfortunately, that this hamster wheel, and I think you're absolutely right, Tommy, that's what's happening, right? So there's a term in psychology called group polarization or group shift, right? And so, that perspective says that if I have an opinion about something, and let's say it's gun control, I like to hunt, so I like guns, and it's not a strong opinion, but I like to be able to own a gun so I can go out and hunt. But if I then meet somebody else who likes guns, maybe because they keep a gun in their house just because for protection for their family. As we get to talk to one another and we find out that we share that belief in guns, our belief in the Second Amendment and our support for the Second Amendment deepens and grows. Whereas maybe individually it wasn't that strong, but as we start to talk and I hear you talk about why guns are important, it deepens my belief. And you take those two people, and I don't know if you remember that the old I can't even remember, the hair product, and so on and so on and so on and so on. That that grows, and that's your hamster wheel. And we tend to get more people to join that conversation. And then I only hear from and talk to people who share that belief, I become really entrenched in that. Yep. And the more entrenched I become and the stronger that belief is, the more I want to reject what the other side has to say. And I don't even listen to their argument because I'm so convinced and so feeling so strongly about where I am on that issue that your opinion no longer matters to me. You're just wrong. And I think if you multiply that up by 1,000, that's where we are as a country. So we've got this polarization, and to protect our psyches, we want to only listen to our side because we don't want to be wrong, right? We find safe space over here. So we seek out information that reinforces sort of where my views, right? And so when we look at social media is programmed to show us the stuff that supports our views, right? So if my Facebook feed shows me stories that only reinforce my beliefs and or disprove or debunk or make sort of the other side look bad. And it's the same for all of us. And I think that's just creating this toxic environment where we don't see the middle ground. And in fact, most of America is in that middle ground, right? And we've lost our ability to see that. And so when we're obsessively checking Tuesday night, obsessively checking those election results, it's the fear and sort of the worry that my side is not going to be reflected in the government for the next, in the president's office for the next 4 years. And that's scary. And we're in so much of who we are is wrapped up in that. The thought that could happen is really disconcerting for a lot of people.
I'll tell you what, so that's all very interesting. And it seems like, so this is the difficulty for us. So let me start where my mind first started. And it was that before the advent of social media, it felt like we had a little more time before we could get into a whole crowd of people who see the world the way we do. Mm-hmm. So if I had to go find the other person that liked guns, I had to at least walk a few spaces to get to them, and then walk to a few spaces to get to another person. Now, I mean, we just get there right now. And then AI, so out of a convenience and out of a show me what I want to see, now you're eliminating my freedom to hear things that I don't think I want to see.
Right.
And so I think, it's kind of, if this were a book, we're running to the last page of the book, Stacey, to say, what's the answer? I mean, hey, how do we get out of this thing? Because we're all in this matrix that's continuing to fuel us ignorantly in these silos of common information. And I think that what is being sacrificed is truth and an openness to a diversity of perspectives. What's your thought about that? How do we shift that? And is there anybody with any energy to pour energy into that?
Oof. Well, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a lot richer.
Right. Come on, Stacey. That's why you're here. You're supposed to answer all in.
So yes, there are things that we can do. I mean, I think individually there are things we can do, and I think as communities there are things we can do. But certainly individually, I think just for our own health and safety, I mean, I think there are things that we can do. One just for our own health is setting limits on how much we want to expose ourselves to that, right? So, I see a lot of friends on Facebook who say, I'm not going to check in until next week because I can't deal with all this stuff. So those this and Social Dilemma and Netflix, important view for everybody. But setting limits, right? And even if it's not social media, maybe it's, I'm going to watch the news at 6 in the evening news, but otherwise I'm not going to pay attention to what's happening, right? So just allow ourselves the ability to detach and to catch our breath for a moment. But in terms of how do we unify and come across these things, I think individually a couple of things. And I try to do this when I like to read, and I'm a news junkie, and I read as much as I can. But when I read, I don't just read one news outlet. I try to pick news outlets that span the political spectrum, because it is true. While I don't believe in fake news, I do believe our news outlets are certainly biased. And so I think the truth is somewhere in between, outlet A, outlet B, outlet C, and outlet D. And so the more of those things I can read and get a balanced perspective of what's happening, that helps me understand if somebody has a different view than I do, where they may be coming from, because they're just getting very different information than I would if I was just reading this other news outlet. So I think educating ourselves, not just looking for ways to reaffirm what it is we believe, but really understanding why someone would have a different perspective on an issue than you, I think is really important. So seeking ways to understand, even trying and being purposeful about going out and saying, okay, this is my belief on this issue, universal health care. Let me go out and see if I can find some information that says why that would be bad. So that could allow us to see where other people might be coming from. So there's an education piece, and I think empathy goes right in hand with that. It's important for us to understand why somebody might have a different view, different piece of it is information, different values. And I say that not in a bad way, but for some people, a particular issue may have really important implications for them, for their family. And so that could be driving sort of their entrenchment in a certain issue. And so I think the more that we can understand and the more that we can understand where each other's coming from, and then the more we can seek out commonalities. As I said, research shows that most Americans agree more than they disagree on all of the hot button issues, right? So most Americans agree that abortion should be legal. Where we disagree is on sort of where restrictions should be. But if we start from the perspective that most of us are here, most Americans agree in some form of gun control. Where we disagree is on the fine tunes, but we can start from a place of agreement and then understand where those other disagreements might come from.
Right. So
I have a follow-up.
I agree with WD right now. Yeah, it is scary right now.
I have a follow-up question. As we're talking about kind of the psychological impact of our political environment and as it pertains to stress on ourselves and maybe even others. What about the people who are not really connected to political views or in the political, hamster wheel, and they are experiencing stress, maybe not directly, but indirectly.
Right.
So how would a person who's not even a part of any of that overcome the indirect stressors that this current political environment has created?
How we deal with stress is universal, right? So there are, and so I'm not sure if this is a direct way to answer your question, Tommy, but how we deal with stress is universal, regardless of where that's coming from, whether I get that directly because of the political environment or indirectly because people I work with or my neighbors are really caught up in this thing. The fact that we all end up in this place of stress, there are strategies and ways that we can deal with that regardless of where it comes from, right? So, one, self-care, really important right now. We have to take care of ourselves. Unfortunately, this week came right after Halloween, which at least in my house has not been really good. So I've eaten most of my feelings this week in the form of Reese cups.
Right.
So we have to take care of ourselves, right? So go for walks. Whether if we've had beautiful weather here in Cincinnati for the last week, so being able to get outside and go for a walk and breathe some fresh air. As winter comes, if it's too cold and gross to go outside, just have a dance party for yourself. Do things that bring you joy and bring you health, physically, eat right, all that kind of stuff. So that's really important. Finding ways, as I mentioned, to detach from some of the rancor and ugliness and the conversation, and feeling okay with just saying, you know what, I don't want to be part of this discussion. I have a group of girlfriends here in Cincinnati. We do a girls' trip every year. As a rule, and this group of girls is very divided politically, but we have a number of other things that we have in common, and we love each other anyways. But, every time we go on that trip, we're not allowed to talk about politics. It's not coming into the conversation, and we don't. So when we're away, we don't bring it up because we know that that's going to go to no place, to no place that's great. And Tommy, you mentioned a few minutes ago this notion of control, and I think you are 110% right on that one. I think so much of the stress we feel is because we feel like so much of this is outside of our control. So focusing on the things that we can control, right? So if it's within our house, if it's within our families, if it's within our communities, what are the things that we can do that we feel like we're making a difference, or having discussions within our community, right? Or bringing people together, or even doing something on our own in small ways that contribute to causes that are important to us, volunteering our time, contributing to organizations, finding some way to feel like you are doing something, even though the rest of it feels like it's something you can't control. So there are ways that we can deal with that stress, regardless of where it's coming from, directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
So let's bring this out of the theoretical world and recommendations for tactics that people can try, and let's try on a real one. So let me come down here to William Brown's perspective here. He says the problem with looking at the other side is sometimes it's so angry and opinionated that you can't find balance. So let me give you this. So it's rather easy for those of us that are not fans of the president to articulate what it is we're so afraid of about 4 more years with him. Mm-hmm. But it's rather difficult for us to see people that are on the other side that have sort of the same amount of fear around a presidency that's not President Trump. Mm-hmm. And so I think that sometimes we oversimplify our definition of who they are, and we can't say they're racist. And so it sort of makes it so we don't have to really deal with who all might be over there. We just sort of broad brush them, they're racist. So I'm going to ask us then to see if we can identify what are some parallel fears that people who are Donald Trump supporters have about Joe Biden and sort of a Democratic presidency. Because I think that this is the name of the show is Diversity Conversation. So we have to be able to show people how you begin to navigate into this water, the turbulent water, and not simply navigate it from your base, but trying to understand what somebody on the other side is a fear. I'll take the first stab at it, and then both of you can weigh in. Mm-hmm. I think that there's real concern or fear of liberalism sort of taking away some of conservatives' freedoms to do some of the things that they value. Mm-hmm. So I think like people who really feel strongly about their faith, they really believe that Democrats, to some extent, make nice in front of the camera. They sort of put up with Joe Biden as this moderate, but underneath Joe Biden, he's the puppet, Tommy, and the extreme left wing of the party is really going to ultimately be moving his mouth and influencing his decisions. Now, people that are more on the left would just write that off as as just a mischaracterization of who they are. I'm not exactly sure though of that. So I think that's one example of an area. Anybody else want to? What are your thoughts?
I went from the financial side. I have several friends who own family businesses or small businesses who benefited, particularly pre-COVID, from relaxed regulations that Trump relaxed a lot of regulations for businesses that the Obama era had put in place. And I think there's a real fear that Biden will reinstate a lot of those regulations in ways that could put their businesses and their livelihood at risk. So economic conservatism, that is a stronghold of the Republican Party. And so they're fearful. It could hurt their business and it could hurt their livelihood.
I think from an identity perspective, over the many years, say 10, 20, 30 years, there has been a browning of America, right? And the browning of America is a threat, if you will. It's a potential threat on my identity, especially if I am a majority, be it urban or rural citizen. Trump allowed me to regain my identity.
Mm.
Now with Biden coming in with all of this, let's all be together, I'm going to lose. There's a threat, a psychological threat that I'm going to lose my identity, my pride and ego that really motivates me to be who I am, and that is a American citizen. So I have a threat that my citizenship, my nationality, my identity, my value system is once again going to be taken from me. That's what I fear in Biden if I'm a proponent of Trump.
Right. And so one of the concepts that I talk about in my book and I teach about is this concept of diversity critical thinking, which suggests that you're able to sort of recognize the legitimacy of perspectives that are different than the one that you have. And as I look at my friend Steve Sanders here, what he said here, I think there's a fear that people who benefit from white privilege will somehow lose that privilege, and the playing field will be balanced. So I may personally believe that, but that's not necessarily a legitimate view that they would have and that they would share. That's a concern that they have that has some basis in reality. And so I think that part of what I'm asking us to do is to say, is it possible for us to identify? Well, let me ask this, Dr. Stacy, why is it important for us to go through this exercise of trying to identify legitimate concerns that people who are Trump supporters may have?
Empathy.
Yep.
Yeah. As a community, we have lost our ability to empathize with the other side. So understanding one another is an important first step for doing that. Right. Yeah.
And I'll tell you. So let me ask you this. Yeah. I think that there's this balancing act that needs to happen between when is it right for me to empathize with the other side? When am I right to be sort of angry, indignant, those who were silent, participate, saying when is it that we need to take the active stand? When is it that we need to sort of be silent? How do we make those decisions? Because I think that's really the battle that we are faced with.
Yeah. Again, all these questions, I don't know. There aren't any easy answers. I do know. I think one of the things that has become abundantly clear over the last 4 years, and again, this is a sort of a universal. Our job. I think if we reframe sort of our job in this work in this conversation, is we can't force anybody to change their opinion. Yeah. I don't think that's what we're trying to do, but I think it's if we can understand where people are coming from, that process of gaining understanding, what we might try to get to, and again, this could come from either side, is the more I understand, it's possible that my views might change as I understand more and learn more and am exposed to, other people's stories and experiences and where they're coming from, right? My views may evolve, right? But my views need to evolve on my own terms, right? So I think if we reframe it as my job isn't to fix you or to change your opinion, but just to learn from one another, I think that's a much healthier place to start from. And and then if we keep it focused on away from personalizing it, right? So we're not going to get anywhere if one side screams at supporters of the president and say, you support the president, you're racist. That will get us nowhere, right? Same thing. If folks say, you're a Biden supporter, you're a socialist, that will get us nowhere, right? But if we focus on the issues and why we support certain issues, and sort of in that space, that's a much more constructive space to start from rather than the name calling.
So I'm reminded of a poem that says, "I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day."
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I work on is trying to model the behavior that I want to teach to others. So I was doing a class, one of the last classes that I did before COVID-19 shut everything down. I was in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was in, a typical class. And so I asked, how many people in here are enthusiastic supporters of President Donald Trump? Raise your hand. And 4 or 5 people raised their hand. I said, hey, would you guys come together? I want to make a fishbowl. So, yep. So they sit down in a circle. And then I began to ask them questions. I said, I'd like you to start by just sharing, what do you love most about President Trump? And so, man, they started saying, well, I love, his policies. I love the conservative judges that he's, And they went on and on and on. Okay. I said, let me ask you another question. I said, give me some examples of how you believe he is misunderstood or misrepresented. And then they started saying things like, I think that it's so wrong when people call him a racist. He's not a racist. He loves this country. And they were going into all of that. And then I asked them another question, and they were just having a blast, man, answering these questions and feeling heard. And after I asked about 4 questions, I said, thank you. And they looked at me like, thank you. You mean we're done? Like, where's the other shoe? I mean, aren't you supposed to call me a fool? Aren't you supposed to smack me around and tell me I'm an idiot? I said, no. I said, I just want to demonstrate to you what curiosity looks like. Curiosity is not about me engaging in a debate with you around how wrong you are. Sometimes it's simply about me asking you questions that enable you to speak as a human being. And as I observe you and your enthusiasm for the things that you believe in and care about, and I show some empathy toward that, maybe you will hear me. Not only maybe will you hear me, maybe you'll trust the process enough to share some of the concerns you have. Mm-hmm. See, when you stop chasing people, you then liberate them to say, I don't like everything about him. Honestly, I wish he wouldn't do this and this and this. And so, no, we're no longer doing this.
Yeah. That's a tool they use in couples therapy. Right? Mm-hmm. It's called reflexive listening.
Yes.
You share. I don't say anything. I don't combat. I don't try to interrupt you. I just listen. Right. And that's all. Right. No judgment. Just listen. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that we're in this thing. Tommy, I see you want to weigh in, but I tell you what I've said before, Stacey, is that I think that we're experiencing what I would call the weaknesses of capitalism and freedom. Mm-hmm. In other words, capitalism says you can make as much money as you want, and then freedom says you can do whatever's legal. Yeah. And so I think that, and I'm not one that wants to bash the media, but because I think that we need them for a lot of insight and information that we're getting. But I really believe that if you're in a country where it's all about making as much money as you can, if you're a news outlet, you know that people are watching when the negative is on the screen. In other words, if it's a tornado in your city, I'm showing you because I know you're gonna stop and watch this tornado. Yeah. If it's not one in your city, I'm gonna show you the tornado in the one city next to you, or this tornado from last year. But I'm showing you a tornado because I know that you're going to watch. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's happened to us, is that we are on a daily basis. I mean, we can hear it now. I mean, we probably hear it in our minds. Da-na-na-na, breaking news.
Breaking news.
Music and everything, and you just stop. You run over there. It's a heart attack thing. What's going on?
Yeah.
We can't pull ourselves out of it, Tommy. Tommy, you said we're on the Ferris wheel, man.
Turn the TV off.
Turn the TV off.
Turn it off. Cured. Done.
Turn it off.
Turn it off.
You spoke to what I have in mind, and Stacey as well. What I was reflecting on is, say if we were to go back 50 or 60 years. Say in the 60s, we had a presidential race. We had a president who was a Catholic, right? And it created a lot of disruption in people's view of how this country should be led, right? By a Catholic or not. We also had the groundswell from a civil rights perspective of different people Then we move into the 80s, and that financial freedom for some was called Reaganomics.
Mhm.
Right? So Reaganomics started to drive some things, and we were spending willy-nilly. It was the
Yeah.
great 80s.
Yeah.
And now we come through the 90s into the 2000s, and then we have actually this country, we elected an African American president. Like, boom. It's, wait a minute, are we going back to the 60s and that trouble with the Catholics and the civil rights? And I thought we were free. And now we're here with, two polarizing views of Democrat and Republican. We have still the need for civil rights, not just of people of color, but across many different dimensions. And it's like the psychological impact of previous years, decades, and maybe even centuries. Now it's landing on all of us. My question is, where are we really going? So I don't know if I think we've made some progress,
Yeah.
right? But I personally think we've had some steps back.
Mhm.
And now we're trying to move forward. Where are we going as a people, as a country, as a psychologically, right? Where are we going?
My way.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to make a comment, and I'm going to preface it by saying I only know about half as much about what I'm going to say as I'm going to say. So, I've been listening to Heather Cox Richardson a lot, who's been writing these daily updates. She's a professor somewhere and has been writing. She's a historian, and someone asked her in one of these conversations about, are we just going to keep going further and further apart? Is there any hope for America? What's going to happen? And she said, and this is the specifics I don't know, but she said that there have been moments in our country's history where this has happened, that we've faced these divisions and we were being pulled apart. But in each of those cases, we have self-corrected and we've come back together. And in advance of the election, she said she said that she has hope that will happen. She's like, I'm not sure it's going to happen in 2020. She's like, but if history is any indicator, it will happen. So as a country, we've demonstrated the ability to self-correct and to come back together. How we're going to do that, I don't know. But it gives me hope for someone who knows a little bit about history, that we've been through it before. And hopefully now, they didn't have social media and 24-hour news cycles back in the 1880s, right. Which I think is going to be a barrier. But I'm hopeful that if not next year, if not in the next 4 years, that at least in near history term, that it might happen.
And so I appreciate you fielding that question. I really do. And just as a quick follow-up, a little bit of background around where that question is coming from. This past week, I had the opportunity to do diversity, equity, and inclusion training in an elementary school. And it was via Zoom, virtual meeting. And it's an hour long. We talk about at a very high and quote unquote safe level, diversity, equity, inclusion. And in the chat box, a private message was sent to me by one of these elementary students. And they asked about why African Americans were treated so badly. Why were they so mean? And then they put in parentheses BLM, right? And for those who are less familiar, that's Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. The first thing I thought was, this I'm not going to name the grade, but they're very, very young, mm-hmm. right? I said, whoa, I'm not going to minimize their intelligence, but these young people don't know about this. This is something they've been told, mm-hmm. Been told. Mm-hmm. And so if the very young elementary students are learning from the adults, either at mm-hmm. home, at school, in society, I believe that creates it's a psychological impact on them. So now in 10 years, maybe 20 years, 30 years, when they are 30, 40, 50 years old, will there be events that trigger that psychological schema that has them realizing that those people are bad? It's us against them, right? That's the question, because that's the same thing that's happening with the psychological impact of slavery. That after 500 years, some people are like, we don't trust the political system at all, right? We don't trust this. We don't trust this. We don't trust them because we never got our 40 acres and a mule. We were segregated out of the suffrage movement around voting altogether. This thing. So does my vote count? And I remember being in school and I was told that it doesn't. Right? Right. So, I mean, at fourth grade, I was told it doesn't. I may be sharing my thoughts from other people. And now later, it doesn't matter. I think that there are people today that's creating that divide because of what we talked about today, as well as I don't think it matters. The apathy, not the empathy, but the apathy. I don't think it matters. Right. How can we overcome this such that we all know that it does matter?
Right. So let me weigh in on that a little bit, Tommy, and then because I think we need a round robin of sort of speed dating kind of answers as to where do we go, because this is the work that we all do, that all three of us are working on a professional level at how do we bring people together. And so if we can share some of techniques that we I think that what you just said there, Tommy, is such a heavyweight in terms of the apathy. But guess what? We just saw the highest amount of votes in an election in the history of our country. So I think at a certain point, people wake up and they become re-engaged. And what we saw was the battle of love versus maybe despise and like. And it's always been questioned, which is stronger, sort of a love of Trump or a hate of Trump, a love of Trump, a like of Biden, and a hate of Trump, And so I think we're always going to, but here's the thing I think that we have to look at is what skill sets do each of us utilize to try to help bring people together? So I've been invited to, at the university to sort of help sort of mediate, if you will, broker the conversation between student leaders and some of the demands that they've placed on the president and the university. And one of the things, so both as a professional and I think as in my personal life, that a lot of times when I come to a situation where there may be conflict, it really is incumbent upon me to really listen to people as well as possible and watch them. Sometimes I have to step out of the arena, kind of rise above it in order to not get caught into foolish debate. Because I find when we're just doing point, counterpoint, that's futile and it doesn't really get us very far. And so I try to move away from point, counterpoint to empathic listening as one of the techniques, but also towards giving grace to people and seeking to be more connected to the human than loyal to my belief and my point of view. So that's one of the things that I do.
One of the things I do as well, and I'm gonna be fully transparent. In my mind, sometimes I think I don't care. I don't care. And I mean that to say, sometimes in conflict or when I'm engaging with some things that I don't have the full answer and I don't know, I have to think about not caring such that it doesn't propel me to really stand in my conviction. Because my conviction of caring about my view, my perspective, etc., will create the barrier for me to have the empathetic listening skill. Right?
Say that again, brother.
So that's kind of a psychological trick that I do.
Yes.
Right. Just like
Necessary.
I've heard other folks say, what do you control? Right. And I do it. Can you control this? Right. And then if I know that I can't control it, I acquiesce to not controlling it, maybe learning more. Right. So all these mental mind games I have to play, right, simply to get out of my own way.
Say it again.
Be civil and engaging with the other person or people.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm able to also say to myself, what can I learn from this interaction? What can I learn? Right. And then in that learning, it triggers my inquisitive questioning. Tell me more. How so? Why do you think that? Where did that come from? Right. And I'm learning. They don't know I'm just poking them to learn. And then I benefit. Right. And that's why I stay engaged, because I see a value or a benefit for me versus, point, counterpoint, me against them. Right. That's my approach personally.
Yeah. Yeah, I do the same thing. By nature, I'm not a debater. I'm not a fighter. It's just not my style. But some of the things that I've learned to do is to recognize what I don't know, and to try to check my own assumptions about where someone might be coming from. Yeah. Even every class, every semester that I teach, the first class I have, I give my students an assignment and I say, I want you to tell me about you. Help me understand you. Help me understanding what you're bringing to this class, what may get in the way of your performance. Just let me know, tell me who you are. And I think understanding who my students are helps me to teach them better, because I understand where they're coming from, right? I think, so I've learned, I try to do that with everything. So if someone has a very different view, I need to understand what brought you to that view, what experiences have you had, and help me understand you better. And again, it's not my place to try to change that. It's just to try to understand you, and I think that helps. The other thing that I do is always trying to hold myself accountable for things. And so if there's been a disagreement, or if how have I contributed to something, and what can I do better next time? Because for all of this, we're all learning how to have these conversations. We're all learning, they're never easy. Conversations don't always end up like they should. So it's, how did I contribute to this conversation or this action going well, or how did I contribute it to not going well, and trying to just get better every time.
Right.
That's been fun. Some not so fun sometimes.
I've had a funny, transparent conversation in my own mind, and Dr. Stacy, I'd like to ask your perspective on it. How do we avoid this overwhelming feeling of joy at the demise of our opponent? Because I think that there's a part of that when you get caught up in this tribalism, there's a part of you, tell me if we're telling the truth, there's a part of you that just wants to spike the ball a little bit. You just want to spike the ball, do a dance, and just, you just, come on now. We can act like we're better than that. We can act like we're better than that.
We can. Do it in private. Give ourselves permission to do it in private. Here's the thing. Regardless of who wins, right? So, if you're supportive of the president and the president wins, you have to remember that 4 or more million people in this country voted for the other guy, right? And half the country doesn't want your guy in office, and half the country disagrees with everything he's trying to do. Yeah. If Biden wins, people will want to celebrate that Trump is no longer our president. But guess what? 70 million people, 60 million people voted for that guy. So the reality is, celebrate whoever wins, but let that celebration be really short, because the work still has to be done, right?
That is great. And when you were sharing this, I thought it's almost equally divided. And I don't know if this country has been that narrowly divided, right? Almost 50-50. Typically it's a leaning toward one way, like, hey, we're the victors, right? Just get on board. And if you don't want to get on board, you're only 25 or 30% anyway.
Right.
Here it's a thin fence, right? Where I believe those who won, short-lived victory party, and then we have to get back to work. Those who have lost, if you will, it's tomorrow I'm working to win again.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. That's right. That's right. So here's what I would say. Let me hypothesize this and see what you guys think. My hypothesis is that if you actually poll, so I believe with my cultural blindness that Biden is the right choice. I think that he has the right temperament. I believe, this is what I'm going to ask you all. This is my hypothesis. I believe that you actually could get upwards to 60, maybe 65% of the country to say they agreed with that. I think the other side is not fearful of Biden. They're fearful of the left and their control over Biden. So they don't think that he can withstand that. And so what I believe is that for Biden to be, if he's the president, I think for him to be effective, just like Obama, it's not all on him. It actually is going to be on the whole other team to dissuade, to calm down the fears of the Trump community, that their greatest fears are going to be realized. And I think that without that, so what do you think about the hypothesis, or are we thinner than that? And maybe I'm delusional.
I think I was going to say the polls show that. Of course, now I'm not sure many people believe in pollsters anymore. But I think the polls that we saw would all say that the majority of Americans thought that Trump's better on the economy, but that Biden was a better unifier. So I think you're right. I mean, I think evidence is out there that shows it. For all of his faults, and he has faults, just like we all have faults.
Absolutely, yeah.
That on the issue of having the ability to unite the country, that he's the better man for that part of the job. So I think you're absolutely right. Totally agree too on like the work that's going to get done is not going to come here. It's going to come from the trenches, right? So the other thing that we have to think about is regardless of who wins the presidential race, I mean, there are all these other local races and congressional races that happen. They kind of tell you what's happening in the trenches. And I think we're so focused on the presidential race that we're not paying attention enough to what's happening congressionally, locally, at the state level, because just like with the work that I do in organizations, when the people leave their job, they don't leave the company, they leave their boss, right? Right. So in so much of our, we pay so much attention to what's happening nationally, when in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, what affects us most is what happens at the state and local level. And so, putting all our attention and all our hopes in one guy and what one guy can do or can't do that person represents something for our country, but what affects us personally and in our communities maybe happen here. So that maybe that has to be part of our conversation too.
Yeah.
I take a little bit of a different approach with their hypothesis. I believe that there's a larger percent of our population that are selecting one of two evils. In other words, just two people representing systems and processes.
Okay.
I believe that these same people would prefer not to have any taxes at all, to become more wealthier, more money. I think that people would like to have free healthcare, right? But they are juxtaposed against the representation or the person presenting it.
Wow.
So there are some folks that say, right, I love what Trump is doing.
Right.
This may be behind the scenes, but I don't like him.
Right.
Right. Right. I believe he's a liar. I'm looking around. He's lying. And then I think there are some people that are looking at Biden to say, I'm unsure about him too. But I don't like Trump, so I'll go with who's up there? Biden, right?
Mhm.
Now, if he increases my taxes, if we were in a safe place from a small business, even a middle size, a large business, we were doing well, right?
Mhm.
Until the COVID, right? If Biden is going to take us back there, I don't like him either. But right now, I had to vote.
Right.
Mhm.
So the hypothesis that people are truly leaning one way, I don't think it's 50-50.
Right. Right.
I believe if we were voting on platforms and not people, it would be the swath of things.
Right.
Right? Like
Mhm.
Dr. Stacy said with regards to abortion, right? Folks
Yeah.
like, yeah, we agree
Right.
that women should have the right for their own body. We
Right.
really do. But we got to politicize it, politicize that, politicize race, politicize, access to, politicize wearing a mask or education,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Right.
But I think, saying, let's have someone in government that we are electing to run our country as a leader that's morally correct, that is really in the interest of me selfishly, and then hopefully in the interest of America, that we're not being, taken over by other countries. But those are my thoughts. That's a great question.
I would add this. I would say that many more of us were in love with the Trump years than will admit it. Whether it's because we loved what he did and it entertained us because it spoke to us, or we hated it and it was a horror movie. We loved watching that. I would say that my view is that our problem is that we are viewers. We are literally trying to sit back in the comfy couch, turn on the TV, and throw popcorn down as we sit back and watch somebody try to satisfy us. And I believe that until we recognize that we've got to become engaged, that this is not about waiting on Washington to solve our problems. I really have said before that we need to really look at utilizing social media in order to tap into the power that we collectively have if we begin to solve each other's problems and collaborate and work together. I believe that we've got to go get a shovel and we got to start digging holes together. And if we all keep sitting back with popcorn, watching the TV, waiting on whoever it is to solve our problem, we're constantly going to find ourselves here. And I think that when we start working together, I think that then we find common ground. Then we can find common compassion. I think the answer to these times and these days are unity. And coming together across all the differences and not spending any time talking about this garbage that doesn't amount to anything for us. If my neighbor is hungry and I've got some food, then I ought to be trying to feed them. If they don't have clothes, then I ought to be trying to help them there. The more we focus on those things, the less time we have for the convenience of arguing over political disagreements, which is a bunch of crap anyway. A lot of people could love each other if they never open their mouth about their political views. They would get along and find ways to work together. I think that that's the charge that we have to present before ourselves. We cannot passively sit back. And I think that's what everybody does. We go out and protest, but we don't follow it up with any strategy. It's everything. We're just loud and quick.
Yep.
And we don't want to do some of the work that's maybe slower and maybe even more customized and individualized. You don't have to change the whole world. Just change yourself and a few people that are around you. And I think that we find progress, potential progress in that. Is that possible? Or is that a pipe dream?
I don't know.
I like that pause there, Tommy.
Yeah, I don't know.
That speaks volumes, man. I think you're right. We're there. And the thing is, so I'll throw one more at you. So I believe that you have to make that beneficial. You have to make it financially beneficial. So I think that we're moved by money. And I think that we can literally monetize doing the right things. That's why I told you about my whole initiative around, gang leaders and drug dealers, trying to bring them in, win them over to bring down violence by connecting them with legitimate business owners. In other words, trying to incentivize people doing the right thing. What I do believe is that we have to give a lot more thought to how we get ourselves out of this quagmire. So I think that this is something for thought leadership across our communities. We've got to get ourselves out of the dichotomy of Republican and Democrat political processes, because that's not serving us well.
So I'll add this as well, because this is bubbling up on my spirit a little bit. So as we're talking about the psychological impact of stress in these political times, over the last, I would say, 4 years, easily, with the election of 45 or 45th president, this country has redirected a lot of its energy around political views. Mm-hmm. So much so that, from social media to mass media to daily conversations, maybe even moment conversations, the topic of political views has usurped our being.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. And then we move closer to this magical date of November the 3rd, 2020. Mm-hmm. I am familiar with a number of people, myself included, who was hoping that when we get to November the 3rd, I can stop talking about what I've been talking about every day for 4 years.
Right.
Now we move after November the 3rd, and we're still talking about it. Mm-hmm. So some people that I know have this political conversation burnout.
Yeah.
And for them to disconnect from something they really can't control, they want to see, hear, and speak no politics.
You're preaching, brother.
So though political views can be a polarizing topic, mm-hmm. Gender or gender identity, race, class, right? All those hot button topics that have sometimes dissipated over the years, some longer than others, like race. Folks like, do we still need to talk about race? We hired a Black president. We're in a post-racial era, right? Or that we are beginning to allow women to move up the ranks in their institutions and organizations. So we're equal.
Right.
And women are like, what?
Right.
Stop talking about it. So there are groups of people that say, I don't want to talk about it anymore with regards to political views. We're going to have a midterm in 2 years. We're going to be talking about this again. We're going to have local elections, right, in a year. We're talking about those. We're going to have another national election process in 4 years. Our calendar years being smashed together, that we're talking about politics that we don't want to talk about in November of 2020. Just like this, we're going to be talking about this again, because 4 years is going to be in a nanosecond.
Oh, they've already started talking about 2024.
Already.
Like November 2nd, the 2024 conversations. And you already see posturing on behalf of folks who, are going to be running in 2 years. I mean, that has already started. Yeah, I agree. I think many of us are just burned out, period, right? We're tired. But it doesn't mean that there's work that doesn't have to be done. And I agree with Eric, and I sat back because I can't follow when he speaks so well. It's kind of hard for anybody to follow that. But I think you're right. There's so much work that we can be doing. And I think every single one of us needs to ask ourselves, what is it that we're doing? Right. So we're divided as a country. What is it that we're doing? And I know for me and after particularly the events of this summer, like many of us are like, we have to do something. And so, I was able to find some tangible things that I could do. And that has helped me feel a little bit more like I'm in control and that I'm doing something about my anger and where I am. And I think all of us need to do that and to just, take our eyes off all that and do what we can do in our communities, in our lives, and within our households, right? To make an impact and, but continue to support and continue to vote, just vote. I mean, I think we've seen and somehow maybe we clone Stacey Abrams and put 50 Stacey Abrams around the country. But to reinvigorate and make sure that people understand how important their vote is, right? That apathy around like my vote. I hope now we see the evidence of what it means when we do get out and vote, right? So do what we can to support our communities, but just continue to vote and vote for the people who you believe are going to help us move forward.
I had a crazy thought that came to mind that we now are all very familiar with virtual reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that we're literally in a virtual game where we're all sort of our avatar is being sucked into the game.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the game of politics, and we're all pieces on the board. And so they say something radical, and now we're in on the board. We're running this way, and we're running that way, and that's what we're doing. We're in the game. And to some extent, you got to be able to pull yourself out of this video game and not allow people to continue to utilize you as a board piece. They figured out how to get us all to participate. And just like Pac-Man of old, we're addicted to the game, and they've told us some things that we care about. And so we chose a side and we got on the board. Mm-hmm. And now all we do is wake up every day and say, who's winning? Is it our side or is it their side? And I think that until we begin to resist that and find collective ways to go back to old school. It felt like the days were slower when we were young. You knew your neighbors. I mean, I don't even know my neighbors now. I mean, we don't have sidewalks on my street. That means don't come over my house for nothing. Don't come over for no eggs, nothing. Don't walk over here. And so you got to helicopter your kids' friends in. We got to go back a little bit old school to making time for relationship. Isn't that crazy? Because when we spend time with each other, we say, you know what? It was so cool.
Yeah.
Just don't feel like we have any. How do you all feel? It doesn't feel like we have enough time for ourselves. Every day is just.
Yeah.
We got to slow this thing down.
Yeah. It's sucking all of our energy, right?
Absolutely.
Sucking it all.
The Matrix. It takes a village. Well, Stacey, I told you the time just blows by.
It does. It's fun.
You did an hour and a half like it was nothing.
Yeah.
We're going to have her back, aren't we, Tommy?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Stacey, how can people reach you if they want to sort of pick your brain further or tap into some of your skills or take your class? How can they reach you?
Sure. Again, University of Cincinnati, look me up. I'm the only Stacey Holloway on campus. So you go to the UC website, uc.edu, put my name in the search field and my info should come up, and would love to have more discussion and conversation.
Yeah. I told you, Tommy and I have a ball together. Tommy, how can people reach you?
Yeah, first, again, thank you, Dr. Holloway, for joining us this morning. Looking forward to having you back again. I enjoy the, psychological side, really do that. If you want to reach me, you can give me a call, 513-421-2300, or visit our website at www.mipcllc.com.
Excellent. Again, my name is Eric Ellis. If you want to call us, you can call us at 513-874-6836, or you can go to our website. That's integritydev.com. I thank you all for joining us again for another of our weekly installments in Diversity Conversations. And hopefully you'll join us again next week as we all sort of fight through this process as a nation. Take care. Love each other.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye now.